Jake, I'd love you guys first to kind of introduce yourselves if you don't mind. Katie, you want to start?
Sure. Hi, I'm Katie. So as Brandon mentioned, I work with him at Bank Tech Ventures on the investment side of the team. Prior to joining, I worked at a seed stage generalist fund. And before that was in much more operational roles, working in growing new audiences, finding new sources of innovation, and I'm helping to launch new products and brands at both startups as well as working at larger companies like American Express.
And
Yeah, I'm Jake Fuchs, similarly an investor on the Bank Tech Ventures team. I've been around the early stage ecosystem for a handful of years now at a couple of different funds before ultimately joining Bank Tech. Before finding my way into the world of startups, though, I was at JP Morgan for a number of years in their chief investment office, and then did a brief stint in business school and tripped into this wonderful world of venture.
Awesome. Thank you. So I guess to kind of set the baseline here, Katie, can you first give us an idea of what is a data room to start?
Sure. And let me actually just share our screen. One second. Yeah. So a data room is basically just a collection of different documents and other information that we as investors can use to find out more about your company and to figure out if this is going to be a good fit for us. As you can see, there's a large variety of documents and information that you can have, but we really see as the most important part and really at the base level of having that company overview, a deck, a demo if you have it, and other documents.
And I guess, so there's a lot you're sharing here. Jake, how does a founder start to digest all this that people might be asking for? So where maybe one of these should they start at, do you think?
I mean, I think it's depending on where you are in the journey. I think part of this is, to Katie's point, the baseline, really just starting with the company overview deck. I think that's a good place to start because it also serves as almost a pseudo outline for the rest of the documents to come. And depending on where you are in the journey, if you're super early and the company was started very recently, you may not have all of these documents readily available. But as you continue through the journey, you'll naturally start to accumulate these artifacts over time, and then ultimately will have, as you prepare to go out and raise capital, a more comprehensive data room, so to speak. But I guess I would caveat that by just saying that as investors, we don't necessarily expect you to have every single one of these documents. I think it's largely dependent on where you are in the journey, to my earlier point.
Yeah, so I guess Katie, actually we have a question. Yeah, love it.
Are you going to share the slides?
Yes, yeah, we will.
Okay.
Yep, and all this will be recorded as well. Yep. So I guess, Katie, when I'm thinking about, building this out and I have my outline, I have my pitch deck and whatnot, I guess how buttoned up should some of these documents be? Because you see some that have like audited financial statements. You see some with corporate charters and amendments and whatnot. If I'm a bootleg startup and getting my company from point A to point B, what is your expectation on the investment side, on the investor side, I should say?
Yeah, I mean, I think to what Jake said earlier, the earlier you are, the less we're expecting of you. But there's certain, like a deck, I feel like is a pretty base level of what I want to see. I need to understand your vision, a roadmap of where you're going. The more information that you can give me, the more it's just going to be easier for us to make a decision on things. But I think a big part of the data room too, and what we do with our founders is have a conversation with us. If you don't have something, go to your investor and tell them before you just start to try to build out all these documents and spending a lot of time. We don't want you taking away from building your business and actually growing it to just put together a bunch of documents you don't have. But I would say kind of just, like I said, deck is really important. Financials, not the audited historical ones, because if you're a new company, you probably don't have those, but show us where you're going. Try to help us get a picture of what it is. The more you can do it, it just helps us to understand your business a little bit better. But like I said, don't waste time. Go back to your investor and ask them before you are taking time away from your company just to put together documents.
Perfect. Well, I'd love to kind of break down each of these boxes a little further for the audience, both virtual and here in person, to give them a better sense of what is the expectation in these buckets. So I'm happy to start in the top left here. Jake, you want to give us a little breakdown of what you mean by marketing strategy, go-to-market growth, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, if it's helpful, I could just run down like the first column,
Yeah,
unless you
great.
want to.
Sure.
So, I mean, marketing strategy, we're not looking for anything overly complex or complicated here. I think it's just an understanding on, especially if you're super early, how are you planning on going to market? What does the go-to-market strategy look like? And then once you've found maybe early signs of product market fit, what does your growth strategy look like? And I, again, would caveat all of this by saying that we don't expect anyone to necessarily hold true to these throughout the entire journey. I think that these are best expectations on how you plan on blocking and tackling these various components. So similarly, product roadmap, where are you in the product development cycle? What do you already have built? Do you have an MVP? Do you not have an MVP? When do you expect to have certain features live? And so it's just really to help us understand where you are in that cycle, because again, we're making an investment in your company and we need to understand where things lie on the roadmap. The third one, market primer. Any investor, venture capital or otherwise, is going to want to understand what the potential return of this investment looks like. And a major component of that is the size of the market. And so anything that you're able to provide in terms of market research that you've already done will just save us time and make sure that we're aligned, because to be frank, if it's not provided, we're going to go out and conduct our own research. And not to say that we won't fact check the numbers that you've sent us as well, but if you're trying to drive us in a certain direction around how to think about the market, this is a really good opportunity to do so. And I think the competitive environment segues nicely with that point as well, which is to say, we need to understand who you view as your competitors in the market. And again, if you don't provide us with any direction on where you think you fall in the broader ecosystem, you're sort of leaving us with a little bit of, I guess I would say, a blank slate to try and carve out what the competitive market looks like. And we may not wind up putting the same comps together. And so again, to Katie's point, I think that ensuring that we're all on the same page and aligned on the information set that we're basing our investment off of, like, this is really the opportunity to do so.
Perfect. Katie, you want to run down the second column there?
Yeah, and just quickly to add, I would say that that first column too is typically things that we do see in a deck. So just in case someone is like, while you're putting that together, those are things that we look for and can be really helpful as you're creating something. And you don't need to duplicate it. It's not like these need to be separate buckets. You can just have your deck, put it in there if it's included. But to that second column, I would say financials. This is where we spend time. And obviously, the earlier the company, the harder this is. But I even like it if it's very early and it's just an idea, just to see how a founder's thinking, and to have them like, do they really understand the business? Are they going to understand the type of, like, for COGS? Do they understand the expenses that are going to be part of what they're building? Or even just like revenue, what does this look like? And to Jake's point earlier, like, help us, lead us to where you want us to go. If we just are going to put together our own guesstimate of what your financials are going to look like, we're not going to be as perhaps generous as you are. So share with us, take the time. I would say do at least a 3-year projection. We appreciate it's very early and that they're going to change. But again, just let us know how you're thinking about this. For existing customers, obviously, if you're just starting out, that's probably not going to be something you have, but it can be part of spending more time on that pipeline, sharing what you think your customers are going to look like, put together a profile, potentially just to paint the picture of what you want us to know. And then for that intellectual property, this will depend on where you are in your business, but if you have anything that's proprietary, make sure that you showcase that and let us know, because that's going to help us understand your competitive moat.
For Bang Tech Ventures perspective ourselves, the fund that we all work for, we do have a lot of regulatory aspects we have to take into account as well. And so, Jake, do you want to dive into the regulatory environment as it relates to maybe some specific industries might be more important than others?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it, again, dovetails with Katie's commentary around intellectual property, which is to say, this doesn't necessarily mean that this is going to be a prerequisite for all of your businesses. I think that this is case dependent on what you're building. We tend to see, I would actually say that I think intellectual property and regulatory environment probably go somewhat hand in hand. What I've found at least is that there's usually more IP in businesses that are hotly regulated. So a lot of healthcare, medical devices, et cetera, et cetera. On the regulatory front, yeah, I mean, financial services, healthcare. I'm trying to think of others that would be major buckets.
Yeah,
Gambling and gaming, things of that nature where there's naturally a heavy hand in regulation. It's really helpful to just understand what that regulatory environment looks like and how you plan on tackling it. We admittedly, as investors, are not experts on every business. I think we have a unique lens at Bank Tech Ventures because we are hyper focused on a certain subsector, but not every investor is going to be. And so, again, we expect that you know more about your business and the industry which you're building in. And so any information that you can provide in that regard will just further help us get comfortable. I guess I'll leave it at that, Brandon, on the regulatory front, unless there's anything else you think that's worth covering.
No. I mean, for us, it's a major risk as well, right? Especially we work in financial services, but any environment that's highly regulated, we have to be on top of. It might shift the entire dynamic of the company at some point in time. So we're just being mindful of that. I think the other kind of areas, buckets kind of speak for themselves a bit, but I did want to kind of lean on, where in the process an investor might ask for information like this. So Katie, do you want to kind of maybe walk them through and give them a 30,000 foot view of maybe our process and
Sure.
then where we kind of dive into the data room?
Yeah, I would say it depends how we're getting introduced to you and what this process looks like. But let's say we're having our first intro call. We'll usually kind of at a high level speak to you, ask some information. Typically at that time, you'll either send a deck before we've had our meeting or share some parts of your deck during our call. And then we'll ask you to send that deck. So like we had mentioned earlier, a lot of this information is already going to be in there. So we start a little bit of that process. And then once internally we've talked about it and decided that we're going to dive a little bit deeper into it, it might be that we have quickly a demo with you if that's relevant, or a second call where we get information. And then if we still feel like it's a good fit, we'll ask for that data room. So I'd say we don't typically, like, unless you're getting a little bit more serious about the conversation, you don't need to share this information right away, just because a lot of times there is sensitive information and you don't want to just have everyone out there having it.
Yeah, and admittedly, I think I won't speak for Katie and Jake, but I know I'm greedy when it comes to asking for more information that might be available. So there's a balance that we understand as from a founder perspective. Like, I don't know how much I should show, right? I don't know how open and honest I should be. And so, Jake, I don't know, you want to kind of talk about that internal dilemma that a founder might have?
Yeah, I would love to. I think that, look, the reality of our job as investors is we make risk reward evaluations for every company that we meet and determine whether or not we believe that the reward is worth the risk that we're taking, especially as it pertains to early stage investing, right? And so to sort of finalize that investment, we put together what's called an investor memo, a diligence memo, right? And it basically highlights all of our findings and lays out the investment case for why we believe we should move forward. That memo, that document is essentially an aggregation of all of these various components highlighting your business. And so the more that you can give us, it is selfishly making our jobs easier to a degree. Again, to my earlier point, there's always going to be fact checking and additional diligence work to make sure that we're aligned in our view of the market, let's say, and your view of the market. But the more that you can give us, the more time that's saved and the more, I would say, efficient of a process we are able to run.
And I'm going to switch gears, but I do want to see if anyone has any questions so far, just in the construction of the data room, or why it's constructed a certain way. Yeah, please.
So a question about the deck and if you have something, a pitch deck or something like that, in terms of when you're sending that over to investors, is writing kind of detailed notes so that they kind of can correlate that information to what you would talk through and what's your feelings on that, or is that more kind of supplemental information that you're providing that you talk more about?
Yeah, Katie and Jay, could you hear the question?
No.
No. Okay. So basically, when the founder's constructing the deck, is there supplemental aspects that the person should be adding in order to I want to make sure I get the question right. Highlight certain aspects of the deck that may require more of a conversational tone, as opposed to here's a deck, right? And you kind of figure it out. I know we've seen countless examples of this, so I don't know if you guys want to talk about an example or how you guys deal with that when it's a little bit more vague.
Yeah, I think that there's two ways of doing this. If you're doing a presentation deck, it's probably a little bit higher level because you don't want too much information on it. And that can be something that you are doing when you're having an actual meeting with an investor and doing things. But let's say that you are trying to have an introduction to someone, or you meet them and you want to send out your deck and you don't feel like the deck on its own is understandable, then maybe you have a little bit more of an annotated deck and you put more detail in there and have that. I would say still don't put everything because you want them to come back and have a conversation with you. I mean, from the founder's perspective, from the investor's perspective, like put it all on there. I would love it. To Jake's point earlier, it makes our jobs easier. But from the founder side of it, I think put enough information that you get them interested and they come back and they understand what you're saying. But leave a little bit there so that they want to come back and have a conversation with you.
Yeah, and I think I would add to that as well. I think that there's two strategies that I've found to be effective. One is provide a deck and use the body of the email as an opportunity to highlight some of those key points. And so more often than not, what I've found is even if I'm talking with a founder and they ask me to introduce them to another investor, let's say, I always ask for a forwardable blurb because I don't want to be the one voicing the message of your company. That should come from you. And so whether it's cold, warm, whatever it might be, I do think the body of the email is a good opportunity to highlight some of those points. And then another strategy that I found effective is I've seen founders have multiple versions of their deck. So to Katie's point of sort of like give enough information and get them enticed, but not too much information where they either will choose or not to, or to take a meeting. I've seen founders put together what they call more of like a teaser deck, which just has high level overview of information. And then they share the more detailed deck only at a later date where there's interest from the investor. So I think that's another strategy that works well. And then I think the last comment that I would make on this is be mindful of who you're reaching out to or who you're asking to be put in front of as it pertains to investor introductions. For example, we at Bank Tech Ventures focus specifically on bank enabling technology companies. The amount of pitches that I get in my inbox from like medical device companies that are just totally outside of our thesis, it's just you're wasting your time and energy putting the work into putting that email together and getting it out. And it's just not something that we're ever going to spend time on here. And as much as I try to respond to every founder that comes in the inbox, the reality is we are inundated with pitches. And so just make sure that the folks that you're connecting with are in the right area for the business that you're building.
Yeah, and we have a kind of an internal dialogue at Bank Tech Ventures where if we can't concisely state, one of these boxes or the company as a whole in, a tweet per se, and the amount of characters that really limit us, do we really understand the company, right? If we can't do it that way. So I put that back on the founder too, to say, it's great you have a 20 slide deck, but can I actually get this in across the table in like 4 to 6 slides instead? Can I really understand the crux of the company? And it's much easier on your part as well, right? Yeah, that conciseness piece is a big piece to the way we look at things. This is great. So I do want to kind of flip to resources, right? Where can you build it? What are the most common ones we find? I know Katie and Jake have seen countless. So Katie, any come to mind off the top of your head of platforms where you can start building these data rooms?
Yeah, I mean, the usual suspects, DocSend, we see quite a bit. Any of those Dropbox, you can put them in there. I would say more importantly, where I've been impressed with founders is when they set the data room up and they have them broken down into some of like these categories. So it will say like market strategy and then have all the documents underneath there and then the financials and have them there. So I think that's even more important than what you choose. From the founder's perspective, I would also choose something that allows you very easily to toggle on and off the permissions. So that way you could have one, let's say, large data room that is everything in there, but maybe you're just having a conversation with someone and you just want them to have access to the deck. Well, then you can send them the same link, but for their email, they only have access to one of them. So just find those efficiencies for yourself as you know that you'll be sending out more decks, and also a way that on the back end you can look, and as you've closed your round or done other things, or you have an investor who did end up moving forward, you can take away that permission choose so that they just don't have ongoing access to this data room with sensitive information.
Yeah, and the ones that can track the usership, it's pretty helpful from a founder perspective, because I'd imagine you want to make sure that people are accessing the link, they are using it and looking at it regularly. And if it's an investor or is that a partner you want to do today? So I always like the ones that require me to log in and they can track when I'm in there personally. Maybe that's not the most investors are like that. So then I do want to, we think about things a little bit differently as well, where we focus a little bit more on B2B. Oh yeah, question. Yeah, sure.
I heard Docs and Dropbox, but as an investor, are there any favorites or least favorites? Like best and worst?
Yeah, that's good.
And maybe you can't promote or not promote, but like tools, I'm curious about favorite tools and least favorite tools from an investor perspective.
Yeah, JK, I don't know if you heard that, but are there favorite or least favorite ones or tools that we usually come across? I mean,
I don't think it, personally, I don't think it matters. Like it's just how we're accessing the information. I would say some get a little bit annoying with permissioning, like Carta I found to be, or I don't know if it's Dropbox or Carta, or maybe both, happen to be difficult just in terms of getting into them and whether it's synced with one email account or another email account. But at the end of the day, it's just a way to access information.
yeah, I mean, the ones that the easiest one is really just a Google Drive, right? Just using G Suite, because everyone usually has some sort of connection to Google or Gmail account somewhere. I know we're built on Gmail as well, so it's a little bit easier. Carta can be tough sometimes. The UI can be a little clunky from time to time, but Dropbox is great. There's another one just called Box, which is also very good. So those are kind of the main culprits. I don't know if there's one that I dislike at all.
So you're not seeing narrow data site, those guys, you're not seeing big.
Oh, data site I have seen very rarely though. Maybe it might be the stage company that we work with, which is more that seed to Series A, and these other ones are a bit more accessible. The one as you go later, maybe you switch it up to a more formal version. Yeah, that's great. There's also a premise where you might have to create a data room if you're more B2B related and you have big enterprise customers who are trying to do due diligence on you. You know, we see that a lot as well. So I don't know, JK, do you want to talk about how a data room might look different when it's not investor focused?
Sure, happy to. I would say, am I echoing for you, everyone? No, it's good. The most important part, I don't think they really need to see a lot of the like market primer and the market strategy. Some of those other pieces like pipeline maybe is not as needed. A lot of what they're really looking at, and depending on what it is, for like banks, for example, they want to see some financials because they want to know if you're going, and not the projected ones, but more the historical financials, because they need to know that you're going to be around. They don't want to work with a company that is going to go out of business because it requires so much for them to vet a company and move forward with them. But they will look at your incorporation documents again, just to make sure you're a legitimate company, because they're going to get audited and need that information. But some of this might be very bank specific. Other kind of like enterprise clients may not have the same regulations. So again, I would go back and ask them, like, have things ready. Certain ones like the incorporation documents have your historical financials that they're going to need and things to that. And it's specifically for those enterprise clients, have the existing customer testimonials if you can, have demos if you can, give them information that's going to help them decide if this product is going to work for them. Like you're looking through the mind of, is this going to make my business better? And so have everything focused on that versus the side of, this is how our business could grow. Here's the vision for the future. They want to know how they can use this right now.
And I guess I want to add one thing, which is whether it's investor diligence or vendor diligence, the reality is when you're convincing someone to either invest or purchase your product, software, service, whatever it might be, you only have a finite number of touch points with that person or entity, right? And I think that you should view the data room, whether it's an investor data room or a vendor data room, as an extension and representation of your company, because the reality is it is another touch point, right? The presentation, how it comes off, it is another thing that is just part of the overall evaluation. And so the more clean and buttoned up it is, I think it really could serve as being that little thing that moves the needle from between good and great, let's call it. I don't think that a data room is necessarily going to make a good company, but I do think it could help a good company stand out and be more so considered in that great bucket.
Yeah, and we spend a lot of time as well, especially when it's focused on in a B2B model where you're selling into other businesses, is the use case studies that Katie brought up was huge, but really what's helpful is like the activation plan. How could the next customer easily follow the yellow brick road that the first customer already laid out? And therefore the time to launch with them or time to success is much shorter, or it's perceived to be shorter because they feel like there's a clear roadmap in place. This is great. So I do have a couple other questions. I do want to pause. Was there anyone that wanted to bring anything up? And I'm monitoring the online Q&A as well. Everyone good? So I guess, Katie, when it comes to the data rooms that you have seen in the past, because we're looking at more bootstrap, Series C, pre-seed area, what would be kind of the bare minimums? It might not be just these boxes, but what would you kind of expect, at least across the board, from startup or reaching out to the first
I don't know if it was just on my side, but I couldn't hear some of that question.
So just what would be like the bare minimum that could help a founder get started in building out their data room? What are maybe the first 3 things that they should make sure they have in there?
Deck, I think financials, and I mean, within that deck, I want to see that whole first column. So, I mean, that's kind of, yeah, I mean, that's more than 3 things, but those should be part of how you're pitching and thinking about your business.
And I guess on the financial side, I'll just add, I think pipeline is a major element of that as well. It's one thing to have financials that just show some forecast with no data underpinning it. The pipeline is really what we use to evaluate and substantiate the numbers that are in your financial forecasts. And I think just to double down on that point, financials that are well flushed out and have calculations that we can track are way better than just hard coded. We see so many financials that are just hard coded and we have no way to trace any of the data. So again, the more that you can give us to work with, the better.
We have a question in the room.
Yeah, I was wondering, how do you, like when you initially start out, how do you build out your financials in an organized manner?
Sure.
That's not like super convoluted and just live in Excel.
So JK, I don't know if you heard, but how do you start building out your financial models?
Yeah, like should you use a software right away to keep organized? Like is Sheets enough? Like how do you, because I feel like it's convoluted even right from the beginning.
Yeah. So I guess how can you build out your financial modeling that's not convoluted? Is Google Sheets or Excel enough? Or should you be using a little bit more programmable?
No, Google Sheets and Excel are great.
Yeah. I think to Jake's point, the ability for us to track, understand, we've seen very complex models in the past with multiple tabs breaking down. Here's why the revenue numbers grow like this. Here's our. If we can see that now and track it with you, that's great. When it's just like revenue, cost of sales, gross margin, that's fine. But as you guys are all building your businesses, what makes up that revenue? Is it all consulting services? Well, that's not really repeatable, right? Is it more SaaS model? Is it, business based? Okay, that's more recurring revenue. Like those are the areas that I like to dive into because we, with our background, look at consulting-based companies which require more stable. But there are other things out there that we love.
Brendan, we can't hear you so great virtually.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
It's still a little muffled, but it's better.
Okay. We were just saying how. Yeah.
Yep.
Good. Cool. We were just saying that some of the building out the model so that we can easily track how things are adding up, especially when it makes up the cost of sales or the revenue numbers. Is that recurring revenue? Is it more professional services? I know it's an area that you guys dive deeply into, considering the makeup of our limited partner network. Yeah.
And I think it's like there's a fine line also, right? I mean, you want to put a deck together that is well thought out and ultimately comprehensive and cohesive. But once you start teetering on the edge of 5+ tabs and calculations that are jumping from one tab to another, and we're all of a sudden jumping through hoops to try and narrow down what the makeup of one number is, it just starts to get a little bit difficult. And so if you feel like you need to have a call to walk someone through your financials, then you should probably try and water them down a little bit to make them easier to follow without having to spend the time hand-holding someone through it.
Well, I think that's a caveat of depending on the stage too. The later the stage,
100%.
model, but
Yeah.
if you're in like pre-seed, seed, maybe even Series A, you shouldn't need that deep level of things. And it also makes it difficult then when you as a team have to go back and change your projections or do things if you have too complicated an overview. We just want to see, I guess, like the detail of, to Jay's point earlier, like a bottoms up model is the best, where you can really see why you're getting to those revenues, why we're getting to those COGS of like, okay, I know this is in my pipeline and this customer is worth about this percent, is worth this amount of money. So then that way my revenue is going to be this, like that level of detail, not overly cumbersome.
Mm-hmm. Just want to see, someone else had a question. Does this work? Can you guys hear that? Yeah. Hold on.
Thank you so much. I just had a question in terms, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, great. In terms of the financials, I think that as founders, we always have like big, grandiose thoughts on where our business is going to go and that we're all going to be a hockey stick and things like that. So I guess from your perspective, is it better to be realistic, to shoot for the moon, or be really, really conservative?
I would say,
and
we'll start and then we'll let Jake weigh in too. You definitely don't want to be too conservative. If it's we as investors assume that the founder is going to have a more rosy outlook. So if you are setting me conservative projections and I'm also going to haircut them, they're not going to look great. I don't want you to send ones that are, too insane, because then I don't think that there's backing behind it. But if you can show me why you got to those numbers and explain it and it makes sense, like do the big numbers, go for it. I think it is striking a balance of like, help me understand how you think, help me see how you got there. And having, the rosier version, you don't want to look delusional.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I guess the only thing I would add there is, as early stage investors, we're typically underwriting to a certain multiple that we're hoping to achieve through our investment. And more often than not, we do need to see pretty aggressive growth to be able to realize that in the time horizon of our investment fund. And so we are biased towards those exponential growth opportunities. And so if you as a founder don't believe that you can realize that exponential growth and the financials are the opportunity for you to show that, I think you may run into circumstances where investors may just say, oh, this isn't a big enough opportunity for us. And so, to Katie's point, I think it's a fine line between being optimistic, but not being overly optimistic to the point where the numbers just don't make any sense.
And admittedly, we do this in practice. We will take a founder's financial breakdown and modeling, and we even build our own version that is a little bit more conservative than that as our baseline, because we get it. Everything's seen through rosy-colored sunglasses for a certain amount of time, but we have to be a bit more conservative again. Yeah. Anyone else? Right now? Okay. So we are coming up on our last few minutes here. I do want to give Jake and Katie a chance to ask, is there just one or two things that everyone in the room or anyone online can take away from this as it relates to building out their data room? What would be that number one thing? I'll start with that, Jake, actually.
Yeah, I think the point that I made earlier, that the data room is an extension and a representation of your company and of you as a founder, and you shouldn't take that lightly. You should put the time and energy into building a data room that is organized, that is comprehensive, and that you believe is the best representation of you as a founder.
Yeah,
Katie?
I completely echo what Jake said, and then just will add on that as you have more information, especially for things that we care about, like an updated pipeline or new customer information, put that in there and let us know about it. It can be another point of interacting with the investor too and saying, hey, I updated your data room. We have some great new financials that came in this month. We have some new customers we want to tell you about. So that can also be a positive way. And to Jake's earlier point, just it can take you from good to great. We're currently looking at a company and they provided me a lot more information. And because of that, it was easier for me to dive in and to get more information, to share it with my team and to get to a decision faster.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. A lot of the founders that we work with, if they have a newsletter, they automatically send a newsletter, right? So we get that on a quarterly basis. That just shares those updates, the back to the data room, which is very helpful. Or oftentimes that's info, so tweet something so that you notice it. Maybe a major customer related or a major financing that is which is pretty effective. So as you guys are building up the company, there is a huge investment. I think
Brandon, you're having some microphone issues again.
Say again?
You're having some okay, it just fixed, but
okay.
Issues again.
Right here.
Could I add one more point, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it was to something that you were saying that I did pick up while we were not having mic issues, and it actually dovetails with Katie's last comment that she made, which is help us get to a decision faster, right? Fundraising is a necessary evil if that's the route that you're choosing to go with your business. It is a distraction from the overall concept of business building. And so if you as a founder can find ways to create efficiencies in that process, to cut down the time to ultimately fundraise, you should find and take advantage of any opportunity that you can. And I do genuinely believe that a buttoned up data room is a major key in achieving that.
Any last thoughts, Katie, Jake?
That's the one I would leave with.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any last questions? Awesome. Well, thank you guys for joining. Katie, sorry for waking you up so early. Appreciate you.
Okay.
Again, this slide and as well as the entire session is recorded. So it'll be available, I believe, in about 6 to 8 weeks following the end of this week. All of our editors got to go through everything and make it look nice and pretty and make me look okay standing next to these two beautiful people. Outside of that, so moving forward for the rest of today, we're going to be moving out of this room and spending most of our time on floors 1 and 5. The continuation of the founder track, which is the beginning of this track here, will be taking place, I believe, all day on floor 5. I think downstairs is going to be a little bit more people ops, data and analytics aspects. So feel free to jump around. Each session is going to start. The next session will be starting at 9:15. So you have plenty of time. Stretch your legs, grab coffee, whatever you need to do. And we will see you at the next session. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jake. Thanks, Katie.